Welcome to the British Columbia Courthouse Library Society's screencast series. In this three-part series, we will be looking at researching legislation. We'll show you how to trace a section back in time to either a specific point in time or to when it was first introduced, how to find cases that have considered that section, commonly referred to as noting up legislation, and how to research legislative intent, which can reveal why a section was brought into law in the first place. To give this some context, let us use a fascinating question that has come up at the Courthouse Library. I've heard selling crime comics is illegal in Canada. When and how did this law get brought in? And have the courts really applied this law? In this first segment, we'll try to find this law and trace it back in time. Given that our example sounds like a criminal law topic, a federal matter, we'll first try searching the federal statutes available on the Internet. We'll start from our library homepage, clicking on the Legislation button. We'll scroll down to the Statutes of Canada link. This takes us to the Department of Justice Law's website, an online consolidation of the laws of Canada. We'll do a keyword search by typing in crime comic with an asterisk, which will allow us to search the singular and the plural variations of the word comic. We'll click on the title Criminal Code in the result list, and sure enough, in our current criminal code, under the heading Offences Tending to Corrupt Morals, making, publishing, and selling a crime comic is an offense under Section 163. And if there's any doubt as to whether this section is referring to what springs to mind when thinking of a crime comic, a definition is provided. Note the small text at the bottom of this section. This will allow us to begin tracing Section 163 back in time. The online version of the Statutes of Canada include notes that provide the history of a section. These historical notes are provided here for convenience, but if you wish to consult the official record of changes to federal statutes, you would turn to the print table of public statutes. Returning to the historical notes in the online version, the first part of the note is referring us to RS 1985. The RS stands for Revised Statutes, also known as a revision, something that last happened in 1985. So what exactly is a revision? Each year, an annual volume of the Statutes of Canada is published containing new acts and amendments to existing acts that occurred during that specific year. When a statute is first enacted, the entire act is printed in this annual volume. From that point onwards, whenever a change is made to that statute, they print only the amendment and do not reprint the entire statute. Over time, this can get unwieldy if a statute is amended often. To deal with this, every so many years, all of the statutes are reprinted reflecting all of the amendments to that point in time, and this is called a revision. There have been 4 revisions in the last 100 years, in 1927, 1952, 1970, and 1985. These revisions are identified by RS or RSC for the Revised Statutes of Canada. So why is this important? In tracing the history of a section, we must work backwards from revision to revision. This is because the historical notes at the bottom of this section only take you back as far as the previous revision. So returning to our example, the RS in the historical notes tells us that this provision in some form dates back to the last revision of 1985. But we can also see something happened in 1993. This could be when the provision about crime comics was added, or it could be a change affecting another part of this section. To find out, we go to the 1993 annual volume of the Statutes of Canada to Chapter 46, Section 1. This shows us that Section 1 of Chapter 46 is an amendment to Section 163, but not one that affected our law dealing with crime comics. We can now be confident that nothing has happened to our laws regarding crime comics since the 1985 revision. Going back to our historical note, we can see that the Criminal Code was Chapter C46 in the 1985 revision. Opening up RSC 1985, Chapter C46, we see the Criminal Code. Turning to Section 163, we see our provision dealing with crime comics. Using the same method, we will look to the historical notes at the end of the section to continue to trace the section back in time. And remember, these historical notes will take us back to the previous revision, the RSC 1970. We can see here a reference to RS Chapter C34, Section 159. This tells us the chapter number of the Criminal Code in the 1970 revision, and the section number in that previous revision, Section 159. Why a different section number? This brings up another extremely important point about the revised statutes. In the process of collecting all of the amendments so that the entire statute can be reprinted in a revision, sometimes sections are renumbered. In other words, our crime comic provision was renumbered. It was Section 159 in the 1970 revision and was renumbered to Section 163 in the 1985 revision. So remember, when you are interested in tracing a section back in time, always check for changes in the numbering. Otherwise, you may end up investigating the history of the wrong section. We can continue tracing this provision by using our method of relying on the historical notes. Pulling Chapter C34 of the 1970 revised statutes, this time going to Section 159 of the Criminal Code, the historical notes take us back to 1953-54, when it was Section 150. It turns out that 1953-54 saw the introduction of a brand new criminal code that replaced the one that was in existence. Unfortunately, unlike the revised statutes, a new statute does not include historical notes. Therefore, because we no longer have the historical notes to guide us, we must use another strategy. We can turn to the table of public statutes where the amendments that have occurred between the revisions are listed. Each year, this table is printed in the annual statute volume. If we look at the 1952-53 statutes, the volume before the new criminal code, we will now have a history of the amendments of the previous criminal code dating back to that 1927 revision. Systematically looking at the references, we at last find the provision for the offense of possessing or distributing crime comics was added in 1949 by Chapter 13, an act to amend the Criminal Code. As we can see, when the provision first came in, it was Section 207. We now have the complete history of the crime comic provision. So this concludes our Courthouse Library screencast series segment on how to trace a section of an act to when it was first introduced. If you would like any further assistance, our contact information is available on our website at www.bccls.bc.ca.